one a harsh world of violence and intolerance, the other a realm of passion and pleasure. The Renaissance set all Europe afire, but in very different ways. If I was standing on top of the Alps, which I'm afraid I can't manage, I could look north to Germany and England, where artists, to their horror, found themselves embroiled in all the nastiness of religious conflict. And if I looked south, I would find a city lying at peace, enjoying an artistic heyday all its own. Venice was the envy of Europe. It was called Serenissima, the most serene city, partly because of its wealth, from its trade in silks and spices from the east, but even more because of the stability of its government. And its artists flourished too. They took the northern invention of painting with oils and brought to it their sense of the mystery of the Orient. Venice's great gift to the story of painting was a unique understanding of the ravishments of colour and the glorious subtleties of light. These were great geniuses. Titian, with his drama and splendour. The mysterious Giorgione, and the man known as the father of Venetian painting, Giovanni Bellini. Bellini's Virgin in a Meadow. And it sounds so tender, and of course it is. And our eye looked with such pleasure at this young girl sitting there with the light gleaming on her white headgear and that marvelous deep blue of her gown and the pink underneath. And then, and it gives me a shock every time, on her lap, is that a dead baby? No, very pale, but asleep. And that shock, that jolt, is exactly what Bellini wants to give you. Because that was how the dead Christ was laid on his mother's lap when he did die, taken down from the cross. And this picture is foreshadowing that and reminding you of that. Once you've been alerted to the fact that there's more here than just a pretty image, you begin to see all sorts of meaningful details. Behind, where the great white bird fights with the snake, the aggression that we meet with. And the two men, in their country occupations, those dead-end jobs, endless labor, endless monotony. And behind them, the great castle, the city of fear, with its walls, protecting itself. And it's in that world that the Virgin sits, not so much in the meadow, but on the meadow, like a great blue marquee. And it's all unified, all made one, both the little details and the great figure, by light. For years, Bellini held the position of official painter to the rulers of Venice. But there was a young man who was to become the greatest artist the city ever produced. Titian was a prodigy, and he knew it. When he was still in his 20s, he wrote to the city authorities demanding to take over from the venerable Bellini as top artist in Venice. Nothing stirred the imagination of the brilliant newcomer more than the pagan myths of the ancient world, which the Renaissance had revived. Venice was alight with stories of the old gods: Bacchus, the god of wine and festivity; Apollo, the god of music; Venus and winged Cupid. Young Titian's paintings of the ancient revels entranced a city whose own carnivals could go on exuberantly for weeks. This is the young Titian at his most wonderful. It's one of the great stories of myth, how Ariadne saved Theseus from her father's hatred. They fled together, and they spent the night on the island of Naxos. And when she woke up in the morning, and you can see she's just awoken, she isn't fully dressed yet, she sees on the horizon the white sail of her lover. He has abandoned her. And it's in that moment of intense anguish and despair that suddenly she hears from the forest the sound of music, and the god Bacchus comes leaping out from his chariot to rescue her. Bacchus has come with all his train of strange, surreal creatures. Somebody not in her world at all. In her world, she's been betrayed. But there's something else. There's miracle, there's hope. There's that other world, the dream world, the magic world, which Bacchus represents. He is the god of ecstasy, after all. And that's what the painting's all about. That wonderful moment when suddenly we're rescued from utter misery to joy. The person hopelessly in debt wins the lottery. And you'll see that she doesn't show any emotion at the moment. She's too staggered by the wonder of what has happened. And I think that Titian felt a special empathy, a special likeness to himself in the way that young, beautiful figure leaps in all his vigor to rescue his beloved. And he not only rescues her, takes her out of the humdrum into his world of wonder and excitement, but he twirls his hand and he makes a crown of stars for her. And in a way, isn't that what the artist does? Saves us by taking us into the magical world he inhabits, twirls with his finger and makes us stars. Young Titian had a rival who, had he lived longer, might have taken the crown for himself, Giorgione. Every now and then, art takes a completely unexpected twist, and Giorgione was one of those twists. He brought something new to painting, something we've never lost. Up to now, no one had ever painted a picture of which one couldn't be reasonably sure of what the theme was. But not with Giorgione. There's always an element of mystery. Who is that soldier brooding in the storm? Why is the gypsy woman naked? We'll never know. This is one of the most argued about works in existence. Giorgione is a bit of a mystery himself. We know that he came from Castel Franco outside Venice, and it's said that he delighted in love and music and could sing divinely, but we really know practically nothing about him. He died young, some say of the plague, some say of a broken heart. It's fitting that one of his finest paintings is in his hometown and was commissioned after the untimely death of a fellow townsman. Matteo Costanzo was a young soldier who died of fever. His family asked Giorgione to paint an altarpiece to go above his tomb. The figures look down, grieving. the Madonna and Child, and the two saints, St. Francis, the man of peace, and the soldier saint, Liberale, a stand-in for young Matteo. Before we go any further, I must tell you that I love this so much. I find it so overwhelming that I'm doing it, even though it's got those nasty bits of white stuck all over it. But in a way, this proof that the picture needs restoration isn't a bad thing, because restoration is all about time and loss. And this picture, though you can never explain the Giorgione, is about time and loss. At first we just see pastoral beauty, a sort of haunting sense of an undisturbed world. Then if you look closer, you can see that on this side, the tower is shattered. It's either been shattered by time, which shatters all of us, or it's been shattered by war. And on the other side, there in that springtide meadow, two young men are sitting talking, and from head to foot they are armored. These are two young soldiers resisting the forces that destroy all human life unless we're careful. This need to be careful, to protect yourself, symbolized by the armor, was something Giorgione was intensely sensitive to. But where are we in this picture? It's too material to be heaven. There's the floor and the throne and the damask wall, but it's clearly not the real world either, which is behind us. And the throne is so exceptionally high. It's as if there's an in and an out. Two worlds that somehow coexist in a way we can't quite explain. That's the special thing that Giorgione brings. It's daringly new, because you can't explain that throne. But it's daringly right, because we respond to it, to the poetry of it. With Giorgione, we regret what might have been, but Titian, his precocious friend, had years to mature his genius. Titian became enormously successful. He was a sort of superstar, wealthy, fated, sought after by kings and emperors. It was a status symbol to possess a Titian. And he had great personal success too, because he was one of those rare artists who become greater as they grow older. Late Titian is one of the climaxes in the story of painting. This is one of the last paintings Titian ever did, and it's one of the greatest paintings in the world. At first sight, overwhelmed by the beauty of those gleaming bodies in that autumnal wood, and then shock, because what we're looking at is a scene of torture. It's the flaying of Marsyas. And then as you look, you begin to understand that only Titian could make poetry out of such pain. The story was that Marsyas, a satyr, half goat, half man, challenged Apollo, the god of song, to a musical contest. And they agreed that the victor could do what he liked with the loser. And Apollo decided to flay him alive. Now Titian understood what that meant, that to be an artist was to challenge the god, and of course to lose, and to have your skin taken off you, to be completely exposed, to have all of you put there for people to look at. So there's the great vertical of Marsyas, and there's Apollo kneeling beside him, the golden-headed god with his laurel wreath and exquisite beauty, so meticulously, lovingly taking the skin off his heart. And behind him, the common man, the butcher, who also skins the artist. He's exposed to everybody. And on the other side, the friend, the other satyr, pitifully trying to help, to bring a bucket of water at least. But you can't help the loneliness of the artist. It's a solitary way. And I think Titian has set round this the three stages of the artist: the potential artist, the child, looking out at us, absolutely horrified by what being an artist can mean. And then the young artist, also not looking, lost in his music, unable to face up, perhaps, to what it will mean to be a great artist. And then the old man, a self-portrait of Titian, the great artist, with his crown and his success, looking very intently at the scene. And I think he's wondering, have I done it? Have I challenged the god? Have I gone far enough in being stripped? And if you look at the face of Marsyas, you can see the answer. Marsyas' eyes are bright. His arms are surrendered. Even though a little dog laps his blood, Marsyas is ecstatic, because he knows this is proof that he has gone the whole way. And the fact that Titian knows that must have proved to Titian that he too had gone the whole way. The picture itself is his complete vindication.
In Northern Europe, artists were struggling for the most basic recognition. They were still considered craftsmen, on a par with builders or carpenters. One man from the German town of Nuremberg was to change all that. Albrecht Dürer visited Venice twice, and he brought back a sense of what an artist could be. Though he came from a craftsman's family, his father was a goldsmith, Dürer single-handedly set out to raise the status of the northern artist. Not only did he think of himself as a genius, but, unusually for a young man, he was in fact correct.
Dürer at 26 was a superbly beautiful young man, and he knows it. This is a very successful time for him. He's just come back from his journey over the Alps to Italy, and that's probably what that landscape is meant to refer to. He's painted himself in the utmost refinement of what the elegant young man about town was wearing. A superb setup. I love the hat with the tassel. And he's also struck out a new fashion line, because young men didn't wear beards in those days, and he's sporting this elegant little beard just to show that he's really sophisticated. The gloves, those very expensive gloves on the folded hands, indicate that, like his wealthy friends, he doesn't really work. Now, this is probably the first self-portrait painted for no apparent reason. Obviously, one reason is that he wants to show everybody how handsome he is. But I think there is another deeper reason. He wants to show what an artist can be. That an artist, just because he's an artist, is a gentleman, even if his father keeps a shop.
Dürer got the respect he wanted. He painted this masterpiece in 5 days while he was in Venice. Artists crowded outside his studio to catch a glimpse of the dazzling precision which Dürer brings to all his work.
And how pleased Dürer must have been when the great Bellini said, could he see the brush, the special brush he'd used for the beard and the hair? And Dürer pointed to the usual brushes and says, nothing special. He'd proved his point, so the show-off came off. Dürer staked the claim of the artist to gentility. And of course it was just then that the turmoil between the Catholics and the early Protestants began to affect painting. No longer was there a captive market for religious pictures, because many Protestants thought they were idols. Bad luck for the world, religious hostility, and for the world of painting, patrons lost and work destroyed.
In the Swiss town of Bâle, all the religious paintings were burnt in a single day. Their leading artist, Hans Holbein, was forced to leave home and family to seek his fortune elsewhere. Switzerland's loss was England's gain, because Holbein came to London and found favour at the court of King Henry VIII.
Holbein left one revolution only to find another, because he arrived in England just when Henry VIII was having his little bit of trouble with getting a divorce and marrying Anne Boleyn, and he'd broken with the Pope. So in one way, a dreadful piece of timing, because there were no religious commissions. But in another, what a brilliant stroke of luck, because Henry was very eager to impress the world with the image of his greatness and that of his court, and nowhere could he have found an artist better suited to this than Holbein. If you're interested in what a person looks like rather than in what makes them tick, then Holbein is the artist for you. He painted lots of pictures of the king, and this is the only one, the only authentic one that's still left. And although it's very small, it seems very big, because Holbein has painted what the king looked like, and the king looked very big, very impressive, very majestic, king all over, an icon of majesty. But you see, Holbein doesn't cheat. He isn't discreet. He doesn't pretend the king looked better than he was. He shows the king as you could see him. Little piggy eyes, long sneering nose, little rosebud mouth. I mean, an absolutely horrible man with that great thick neck, and the sense that he's so large, so big, so bullish, that you really can't get him into any frame. And yet he shows the grace notes too, because after all, Henry must have had a nicer side, and perhaps that's shown in the wonderful hat with that sort of feathery crown and the embroidery underneath. But everything else is just saying power. All this gold is real gold that was used. And the hands with their rings are kind of clenched hard, because the king doesn't need really to have his hands free. Just by being he has power. And that's what a really great artist can do. To paint somebody whose essential majesty, and yet show him to be a deeply unpleasant man.
Henry had broken from Rome, but Rome was fighting a rearguard action. The Inquisition, for one, was laying down strict guidelines about religious painting. A Last Supper, for example, was to be a devotional image, the sort of thing Tintoretto did so well. After all, this is the central moment when Christ gives bread to his disciples and says, "This is my body." But the Dominican friars in Venice commissioned their Last Supper from Veronese, and they got what he did so well, a worldly scene, tippling guests, dwarves and servants playing, cats feasting under the table. What could be more controversial? The Inquisition asked Veronese to explain himself.
What he said was, we artists, notice the pride, have the same liberty as poets and madmen. I made this picture according to what I thought best. It was made to my understanding. In other words, he's making a claim for inspiration, for the personal vision of the artist. And he vindicates it. They made him make a change.
He said fine, and the only change he made was to change the title, not The Last Supper, but Feast at the House of Levi, which also occurs in the Gospel.
The artist had won, and Veronese went on painting the rest of his life for both church and state. Beyond the courts and cities of Europe, it was the seasons that ruled daily life. Beside the fear of disease, there was the constant threat of famine. A bad harvest could turn a thriving village into a ghost town. And people could count themselves lucky if they lived past 35. Scenes of rural life had been painted before, but with Peter Bruegel they became a subject for great art. The Renaissance had made humanity central, and in Bruegel this understanding is extended to the humblest of people. He respects their dignity, but there's no romanticizing. This is a picture to look at in the summer before we start shivering in sympathy. No artist has ever made so visually compelling the weight of winter. There were these great leafless trees marching down into the valley, and the hunters floundering through the snow with their exhausted dogs, and they've caught so little. And down below, those tiny little skaters lost in their great world. It's a bird's eye view, but it's not for the peasants. If you look, every peasant in the picture looks down. They had to look down. They had to grub for their livelihood in the real world. We saw that bird as the surrogate us, but the peasants don't. They flounder in the snow. In our next program, we return to Italy, where the story of painting unfolds in the heart of Rome.